As we begin this scheduled 12-week study on the book of Daniel, this was the very first topic I ever spoke on in church a little over 25 years ago. Daniel is classified as a major prophet. He's grouped with Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, and even though chapters-wise, there's not as many chapters of them, he's more in the category of the minor prophets because his prophecies are so accurate, so major, and they basically lay out the history of the world for the next 2,500 years. He is classified as a major prophet. So Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Daniel is divided into two sections for this class, one chapter a week. The first 6 chapters are kind of the life story of Daniel. It's also some of his 3 friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, more commonly known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We have some prophetic dreams and other interpretations in these first 6 chapters, but the second 6 chapters contain strictly prophecy that basically lay out the future of the world from that time 2,500 years ago up until the end times, which we believe to be soon. All right. So we'll begin. First, a little bit of background, because this is one of the shortest chapters of Daniel, so I wanted to do a little bit what led all the way up to this point. This is towards the end of the Old Testament time period. All right. When we concluded with the Genesis account, we ended at the call of Abram. We just did the background of where Adam and Eve, the fall, and where all the human race came from. And finally, several thousand years into creation, God selected a man, Abram, whose family would later become Abraham, whose family would become the line of Israel, who would bring the Messiah into the world. So what I wanted to do here is give a very brief summary of the Old Testament, which gets us to this point. All right, so God calls Abraham around 2000 BC. Then there's Isaac, Jacob, and his 12 sons. They go into Egypt, stay in bondage for over 400 years, come out of the Exodus, and then go into the wilderness for 40 years, wandering. They finally take the promised land. Then we have the time of the judges after they conquer the promised land. Then after that, Israel wants a king. So reluctantly, the Lord says, that's what they want, I'll give them. We have 3 under the united kingdom of all 12 tribes. We had Saul, then David, and then his son Solomon. And because of Solomon's disobedience, Israel was split into 2 nations then. Solomon was from Judah, and he also had the tribe of Benjamin. That became the nation of Judah. And the other 10 tribes became the nation of Israel. And so all throughout the Kings and Chronicles, this depicts the story of Judah and Israel back and forth. Israel had all wicked kings, and in 722 BC, they were carried away captive by Assyria and have not been heard of since. However, some of them over the years did trickle into Judah, so there are some remnants of them into this. Today we call them Jewish people Jews, but these Jews are not really descended from these people. They're descended strictly from Judah and Benjamin in this nation. So Judah had a line of kings as well. Unlike Israel, they did have some good kings. Hezekiah, Josiah, Jotham. But in the end, they were taken captive by Babylon. 3 different invasions. The first was, I have written down as 605 BC. And in this first invasion, the king took the very gifted, talented, strong young people, and in that group was Daniel and his 3 friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who will all get new names later. So that kind of sets the stage of how the book of Daniel begins he is carried into captivity, and we'll now begin with chapter 1 and do our usual verse by verse read. Verse 1 and 2. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. So this is the Nebuchadnezzar we'll hear all throughout the book of Daniel. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. All right. This is one of the last kings of Judah, Jehoiakim. He's in the line of David, one of David's descendants. This is the first of 3 invasions. The first was 605 BC. This took Daniel to Babylon. The second was 597 BC, and this included the prophet Ezekiel. And then finally, the third one is when Jerusalem and the temple was destroyed in 586 BC. The mighty temple that Solomon built around 1000 BC was destroyed in 586 BC, and the children, the rest of them, were taken captivity into Babylon. And now here's Daniel's account, verses 3 through 7. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of the officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, youths in whom was no defect, that would include Daniel here, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability for serving in the king's court. And he ordered him to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. Chaldeans, Babylonians, same thing. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. So he had big plans for these people, so by seeing them he must have knew that there was something special about them. Now among them from the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Then commander of the officials assigned new names to them, and to Daniel he assigned the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. All right, so we know about the background of Daniel and his friends. He was among a group of youth, and among those youth, these 4 stood out, and Daniel probably stood out above them. When we talk about Old Testament heroes, a lot of them have flaws. We think of King David and his failure, Moses murdering a person, but there's really very few who have negative incidents recorded about them. Think of maybe Enoch before the flood, which we don't know a lot. Joseph, the great son of Jacob, who was risen to the court of Pharaoh. Elijah, but he did have that one incident where he fled from Jezebel. But Daniel seems to be the cream of the crop. As we read his story all throughout this book, from a youth here in chapter 1 to an old man in the latter part of the chapter, he almost seems to be flawless. And anyone always wonder, why do we refer to Daniel by his name, by his Hebrew name, but we always seem to refer to his friends by their Babylonian name? I guess because Daniel, well, that's first of all is the name of the book, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that story in the fiery furnace, which is talked about in chapter 3, they're so popularly known by that they're called back to their Babylonian names instead of the original Hebrew name. So they've been selected. Daniel's crew is the cream of the crop, and Daniel is even the head of all of them. So the sages sat here. The king has provided them with all they want. This is King Nebuchadnezzar. He has an abundance of possessions. He gives them the best food, the best wine. But as we see, Daniel takes his first stand, and this is a step that leads him to greatness and puts him in the position that he'll get to. We'll read verses 8 through 13. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has appointed your food and your drink, for why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. But Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be observed in your presence, and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. This is one of the very early examples of very young Daniel taking a stand and being such a great leader. You can see he's full of wisdom and guided by the Spirit of God. You can see the favor on his life, like Joseph. You would think, one of the things you can see here, the commander of the officials has great authority. You know, these are foreign kids who have been come over here, and he basically gives an order and they obey. But his willingness to cooperate with Daniel kind of shows the greatness that he sees in him, and is willing to cooperate. But you know, this isn't 21st century America. You know, the worst case scenario today, you did something wrong, you'd be fired. But what does this guy, the commander, say to Daniel when he makes this suggestion? He said, you would make me forfeit my head to the king. So he knows if something goes wrong, and Daniel, you know, begin to look pale and thin, and his friends, this could cost him his life. But the Lord's blessing, his favor is upon him, and Daniel, in his wisdom, says, well, let's try this for 10 days. And after the 10 days, let's see how we look, and see how the other youth look, who are eating the abundance of meat and drinking the king's wine. And what does it say? We'll read that now, verses 14 to 16. So he convinces them to do this. He said, all right, we're going to try it out and see. All right, 14 through 16. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, their appearance seemed better, and they were fatter than all the youths who had been eating the king's choice food. So the overseer continued to withhold their choice food and the wine they were to drink, and kept giving them vegetables. So now Daniel's said, make a test, see what happens. And the results were obvious. Daniel looked healthier, and his friends and all the other people of Babylon who are eating the king's meat, drinking the king's wine. Here's a classic example. When you're obedient, follow the Lord's teachings, he will honor you. Now, I do also want to stress though, there are times when your obedience, you still might be obedient, but the results might not be what you wanted. We'll see about this in chapter 3, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were faced with a decision even more critical than the one Daniel was facing here, and they declined, and then we'll see what happened there. But in this case, Daniel said, put my God to the test, let us eat our just vegetables and things like that, and see how we look. So the overseer sees this, no doubt is impressed, but if we know what all the events that are coming from the book of Daniel, and the things that will come from him, we can say, well, he hasn't seen anything yet. The events that will occur here, and the things that will happen through this man. Verse 17. As for these 4 youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. And as we go through Daniel, that will definitely be seen, even in the coming chapter. Several times, several kings will have dreams to him. And then in his latter years, the latter part of this book, it's all about dreams and visions that the Lord is giving him about the upcoming nations in the next few centuries, and even to the end of time when the Lord returns. He blesses these already intelligent youth, so they wouldn't have been selected to begin with if they hadn't been very smart. He gives them even more knowledge, intelligence. And they're also, and they will again play a major role in this book. Daniel's 3 friends, and especially Daniel. So the first book of chapter of Daniel will close out 18 through 21. Then at the end of days, which the king had specified for presenting them, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and out of them all, not one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, so they entered the king's personal service. As for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in all this realm. And Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. So this is a great end up to the first chapter. It gives a very good summary. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, although youth, are given audience and they're giving advice to the king Nebuchadnezzar. It's like, teenagers today giving counsel to the President of the United States. So they would not be brought into there if he did not see in them something special. He saw him at the beginning when he took him captive. Daniel and Joseph are two of my favorite characters in the Old Testament, and this is very similar to the story of Joseph. Remember, Joseph was taken away captive like Daniel was, sold into slavery by his brothers. Then he was put into prison but was given favor, and then he became the most powerful person in the world next to Pharaoh, and Daniel has assumed this similar position. The stage is set now. Daniel and his friends have been put in a high place and would have great say, including interpretation of one of the most famous dreams in the Bible, which we cover the following chapter, in chapter 2, which we won't get into today. But just wrapping up this first chapter, when you think of examples of faithfulness and morality and taking a stand and the Lord's favor and blessing upon your life, it closes out by saying until the end of the reign of Cyrus. It's almost like saying he began as a teenager under the reign of President Eisenhower, and he continued unto President Trump. So in other words, decades of service, serving the Lord and interpreting dreams and setting forth, writing a book that we read today about events that we believe soon be unfolding. So that concludes chapter 1. And chapter 2, we'll discuss a dream that Nebuchadnezzar has and brings Daniel up to a place of very importance. All right?